Hello, all. Welcome to another episode of Martial Arts After Dark. This is our little conversation hour where we informally discuss topics and combatives and martial arts and pretty much anything that strikes our fancy that comes out of warriorship as such. And I wanted to discuss with you tonight pressure testing and what it is not, and how other categories of martial arts have become somewhat perverted as this idea has become also perverted in the community of martial arts. So, when people talk about pressure testing, you can pretty much tell a couple of things right off the bat. They give themselves away verbally quite frequently. You can generally tell by what somebody says about their experience, and that's something I've noticed as someone who's studied now for and taught for over 40 years. So, sparring, okay? Sparring is not fighting. It's the first thing we need to understand. Okay, sparring is not bad, and there are many variations of sparring. Rolling, okay? Hard sparring, soft sparring, whatever you want to call it. The thing with sparring is that, generally speaking, because of the intensity level, it simply is not on the same level. So, some clubs don't spar. Some clubs don't spar and they fight, okay? This was a lot more common. You don't see that so much nowadays. But it is something that traditionally you did see back in the 70s and 80s. Principally in cities like Baltimore, where there was a lot of dojo storming going on, people kind of organizing attacks against other dojos. You had to be able to fight at the drop of a hat, so you really didn't have time to spar. You would fight. And you could call that, in some ways, depending on how it was done, a form of pressure testing. However, even within that realm, you have to make some distinctions, okay? What pressure testing is and what it's supposed to be is something that puts you into the position of the actual possibility of an attack so that you are traumatized. Injuries are very frequent, and you cannot sustain pressure testing. And I want to give some credibility to certain guys on YouTube, like Sammy Franco, because they make some good points about pressure testing, which, again, give people away very quickly. This idea that pressure testing is a constant thing, the people that say that, and then you can see their videos on YouTube of what they call pressure testing, okay? And it's not. Because to sustain that level, you would have people just beat up, injured, and really traumatized. Because you have to have a certain amount of trust in the environment and in your teacher, because you are putting yourself in that situation to that degree. I have come up with those things in the dojo, okay? I came from a very tough fighting club in Baltimore. We fought constantly at the level of pressure testing. And I'm telling you that because it wasn't always a good thing. I mean, I have concussions. I've broken every finger on both hands, all kinds of scars and whatnot. that's the way it was done back then. And it was done at an intensity that frequently you had injuries and such. But the philosophy was better in the dojo where your brother can pick you up than on the street. So that's one thing that you have to know about pressure testing. It's best done when it's done efficiently and with a very specific purpose in mind. Now, you can also see what people call pressure testing. And if you see anything that is short of people really going tooth and nail, like their life depended upon it, then it's not pressure testing. So, very important to keep in mind. My own experience also, when I trained the guardian angels in San Francisco, we had forms of pressure testing at times. And when I taught students in my own classes, we would have pressure testing scenarios for things in addition to fighting and even sparring. Okay? So when I speak of these things, I'm giving you some experience behind what I'm telling you. I was a bouncer for many, many years in the wrong kind of place. In addition to that, so understanding violence, and which brings me to my next point. You're best learning these things from people who have experience, because unless your teacher has experience and gives it to you directly, even then you're one step removed. And when you get a certain age, you're severely limited to how much of this stuff you can do because of your own body and your own aging process. Okay? You want to get this stuff really hit it hard when you're younger. So when you get a little older, you don't have to pressure test as much, so you don't injure yourself constantly. So a lot of this misconception comes with certain attitudes that you see. One such attitude is this idea that any type of sparring is fighting, okay? Sparring is a good thing which allows somebody to work up to a level where they can fight, okay? As a matter of fact, I would even argue that for a good majority of people, especially if they're a little older, if they spar and they practice technique with the right intensity levels, they may never work up to a point where they fight, okay? And put yourself in a position where you can start to approach pressure testing and fighting tooth and nail. But you cannot substitute sparring for that, and I'll tell you why. If you watch people spar, they lose a lot of the qualities that make a real situation real. And again, I'm going to tip my hat to Sammy Franco on another point which he made where he's absolutely right, talking about the kinetic energy in a real situation. People are coming at you really fast and hard. They're not standing there in a Mexican standoff. There's just a whole different level of smash, okay? If you're in a bar for a situation like that, you can well imagine. And you have to understand how those movements affect what you do, in addition to your own internal process, where your adrenaline and what you feel, what you think you feel, and what you actually feel. A lot of people, when they start their adrenaline hits, they think that they're weak and that they're unable, when in fact your body is preparing itself. Okay, and if you don't understand that, you're going to be in a real bad way, even to start with. Okay, so sparring consequently builds bad habits. Best example I can think of is in karate. Okay, I did karate many years, and when you fight with karate, okay, you do not bounce on your toes. Okay, if you watch people spar, they're bouncing, and when they're throwing techniques, okay, you don't do that. Okay, and you have to understand at some point to draw the line between that type of conflict, of getting comfortable with it, moving on, and developing really poor technique and bad habits because you're bouncing around in the ring. A boxer bounces, and that's fine. But I'm giving you an example of where sparring will give you bad habits, okay? We'll go on to the next one. Hang tight.